a very popular mantra that was, I guess, created probably by the organizations who sell and make antimicrobials for restoration world is the term clean, kill, coat. The idea is clean a surface, apply an antimicrobial, and then paint over with an antimicrobial coating. But what we found later was that the use of antimicrobials wasn't as necessary as we originally thought a couple decades ago. So, in this presentation, we're going to talk about when to use antimicrobials and the general importance of using antimicrobials versus cleaning a surface really well. For those who don't know us, Environmental Initiatives is an indoor environmental testing company. We assess buildings for water damage, moisture, mold, sewage. We can assess buildings for the movement of smoke. We do a lot of our testing on site with a microscope and other tools. This gives us the ability to instantly tell you what's going on, where the contaminants traveled, and what needs to be completed. As for myself, I've been doing this consulting work since 2003 for about 17 years at the time of this recording. My background is in microbiology and immunology, and I studied for my research and my thesis how water-damaged buildings affect health. So I'm going to give you my perspective regarding antimicrobials, mold, moisture issues, and health from a background of actual research. All right, so proper cleaning versus antimicrobials. What are we going to talk about in this 15 minutes? By the way, if you haven't done this yet, pause this presentation, go to our website, microscopicminute.com, and download the worksheet that goes along with the presentation. I strongly suggest you do this. It will help with retention of the information and make sure that your colleagues are actually listening while you're all sitting around the table. All right, so first we're going to talk about briefly mold and health, how mold affects people, and how that plays into antimicrobial use. Then we'll talk about water releases and health. It's different. A mold job is different than a water job in some ways. Then we'll talk about cleaning versus antimicrobials, the benefits, the pros, when to do it. And then we'll also talk about when antimicrobials are more useful and what types of projects should we almost always be using antimicrobials. For questions and answers, you can call or email me. My information will be at the end of this presentation. Also, you can provide questions in the comments section. I do look at the comments and I will answer questions. Also, make sure you like the post and like our page to get notified when additional presentations are being released. All right, so let's talk about mold and health. First off, to describe mold quickly, mold grows like a field of dandelions, but really small. Now, some molds look different, but many of them will have what looks like a root structure. We call them hyphae. What looks like stems, we call those conidiophore, and what looks like little seeds off the top, we call those spores, conidia, and there's other names for them. Different molds do look a little different, but what we have to remember is that it's not just the mold spores that we worry about. In fact, there's all sorts of smaller fragments of the mold debris that can cause the allergens and the other types of inflammagens that can come with mold. And even in a situation where sampling shows very little mold spores, you can still have a decent amount of mold debris that can cause health problems with certain people. When we discuss health effects that's related to the mold itself, not to the other stuff like the dust mites, the chemicals, and other stuff that accompany water damage and mold situations, but to the mold, actually only 25% of people seem to have a reaction to the mold itself. So most of us don't react to mold. And the people who do react to mold, the number one health reaction they're going to get is allergies. 1 out of 4 people, or about 25% of people, have an allergy to something, right? Whether it's cats or dogs or mice. But 10 to 15% of people have mold allergies. Those mold allergies have to be specific to the right mold. So a person can't just say, I have mold allergies, so this mold is going to make me react. It doesn't work that way. It's like saying that you have mammal allergies. No, you have allergies to specific mammals. I mean, do you have allergies to kangaroos? Well, I don't know, maybe. but you're saying you have allergies to cats or something else. Same thing with mold. It has to be the right mold for the right person. Beyond allergies, 2% of people can get what's called chronic inflammation. All right, chronic inflammation is, they used to think it was from mold toxicity, so the terms black mold and toxic mold, which are terms you should not be using. They thought that those reactions were to mold mycotoxins. Now we don't think that it's the mycotoxins, but it's the general stuff that's occurring with water damage, different things that can cause the immune system to go crazy. 2% of people can have that sort of reaction. They would call it a toxic reaction. It's very treatable now. Doctors actually know how to diagnose it, and they know how to treat it. And most people, if they see the right doctor, can get over this pretty easily. They just have to then avoid additional exposures that can set off the symptoms again. Asthma can also occur, but asthma is more of an instant mold reaction or an instant allergen reaction. Most mold allergies are actually delayed. For example, if you have poison ivy, right? You get your exposure one day, you don't have the reaction right away, you have the reaction to poison ivy the next day. And actually, most mold allergies are like that. Infections can also occur, but infections to the live mold is actually very rare. There's only certain mold species that can be opportunistic pathogens. Opportunistic pathogens are types of molds that will grow inside of people, and you have to be extremely immunocompromised. So people who have really bad diabetes or HIV/AIDS or other types of immune disorders that lower their immune systems. Now, I know I said 25% of people can have these reactions to mold, but I only have a percentage here. Well, there's also a percentage of people that have what we consider an aggravated or an elevated mucus production reaction, where if they're inhaling a bunch of moldy debris, their body's producing they're having some inflammation in the lungs, but they're having a lot of mucus production pushing it back out. Now, when we think about water damage in health, we're not thinking about just mold. There's other things that occur with water damage. When we think about water damage and what's growing in it regarding health, we're primarily thinking about bacteria. And not just any type of bacteria. Actually, we're very specifically interested in gram-negative bacteria. Now, I have a whole presentation that discusses gram-negative versus gram-positive bacteria. Totally different discussion. Let's just say that there's a whole group of bacteria that are far more inflammogenic. In other words, when the water sits and these bacteria grow in general, when the water dries, the bacteria then dry up and break apart. We then are able to inhale all these little pieces of the bacteria, and those little pieces from the gram-negative bacteria can cause inflammation in our lungs. Now, do we need to use antimicrobials on these bacteria? Nope. They're already dead. They're not infecting us. It's simply the inhalation of the bacteria debris itself that causes the problem, which is why cleaning is so much more important than using an antimicrobial in general with typical water losses. Now, there could be some pathogenic bacteria, bacteria that want to actually grow in us, but it's not really a big concern. The types of bacteria that like to grow inside human bodies like the temperature, they like the pH, they like the condition. And the condition inside our body is not the same condition in a water-damaged building. So the normal environmental bacteria that we get exposed to all the time and it doesn't matter, those bacteria are going to dominate and grow the most in water damage. The pathogenic bacteria that want to grow inside us, they're not going to be growing at levels that we can think about in a typical water damage situation. So using an antimicrobial to try to kill these pathogenic bacteria, if they're present, probably not realistic. What about parasites? Parasites are alive and they can infect people. Yeah, and you know what? If water comes through soil, we might think about parasites, but the truth is you're going to really have to be drinking the water, licking the wet floors in order to get in these parasites inside our bodies. So we're not really concerned about getting a parasitic infection from a water damage situation. So using antimicrobials to try to address parasites, that's not really realistic in our area. What about viruses? Sure, there'll be some viruses in the soils, but the types of viruses we really think about for infecting humans, or specifically being able to become airborne and then infect humans, no, that's not realistic. And trying to think that we have to use antimicrobials to kill viruses for the water that comes through our soils so we don't get infected with those bacteria, that's not realistic either. So again, for all these situations, it's all about cleaning. What about the chemicals? If we have water coming through soils, would the chemicals affect us? Actually, maybe. I mean, that's more dependent on where your building is. Is this building near farm fields? Is it near industrial plants? And the chemicals could actually matter, but you know what? Antimicrobials aren't going to do anything to the chemicals. It's going to be cleaning of the surfaces that's going to address the presence of the chemicals. All right, so we just talked about what's in water damage or what's in a water situation. And now we're going to talk about whether it pays to clean or if antimicrobials will help us. All right, so you're in a mold remediation project or a water damage remediation project. The question is it more important to thoroughly clean the surfaces to remove as much of the debris as possible, or is it more important to try to kill what's present, right, in your typical mold or water damage restoration project? My response is it's far more important to clean as best as you can, and antimicrobials or trying to kill what's left, in most situations, doesn't matter. Now let's think of it this way. I told you before, we talked about different types of items that can be present in water damage. What we care about most with mold or water damage is, one, the inflammagens or the allergens from mold. We care about the gram-negative bacteria, and we don't think that they're going to infect us, so we don't care if they're alive or dead per se. We're worried about inhaling the bacterial debris and the debris itself causing inflammation, so alive or dead, doesn't matter. And then we might care about the chemicals, and chemicals aren't alive anyway, so antimicrobials won't matter. We don't really care too much about the pathogens or about the parasites. And we don't really care much about the viruses in a typical water damage or mold remediation project. Viruses and parasites we would want to kill, but we don't care about them in these situations. So in most situations, we don't care about killing. We care about cleaning, and that's what matters. Now, to give you some ideas about examples, if Mr. or Mrs. Jones or someone else is telling you that they really want to apply an antimicrobial and you're not sure about it, you say, well, Mr. or Mrs. Jones, what about peanut dust? People who are allergic to peanuts. What would you rather have me do? Do a really thorough job cleaning or fog with an antimicrobial or spray with an antimicrobial to kill the peanut dust? The peanut dust is already dead. We want to clean. What about cat dander? The cat's already gone, but the dander's still present. You think an antimicrobial would help with cat dander? Nope. Cleaning would help with cat dander. How about pollen? Is pollen alive? Well, that's debatable, but pollen you'd clean, not try to kill. These are all common ideas as to why we clean to address allergens and things that can impact the immune system. We don't kill. But you know what? Antimicrobials are useful in certain situations. Here's what my thoughts are regarding the level of usefulness of using an antimicrobial in a project. First off, if you have clean water that comes from a burst pipe, antimicrobials are pretty much useless. If you're dealing with really a mold-only situation, like if you have a situation where mold is growing in a house because of elevated humidity, right? So we're not expecting a lot of bacterial growth, but mold grew because of condensation. Antimicrobials, pretty much useless. What about category 2 water? So the water sits for a couple days. We don't really care about, some mold may have grown and some bacteria starts to grow, but we don't think about pathogenic bacteria. We're not really worried about that. So do we really need to kill the bacteria that's present? Probably not. But we start to maybe think about antimicrobials, but still cleaning is what rules the day. What about category 3 water? So water that came through like soils, right? Okay, yeah, some different types of bacteria coming in. maybe some viruses, maybe some parasites, but we definitely start to think more about using antimicrobials when the water comes through soils. Sewage, feces, and biohazards? Heck yes. We're going to clean the surfaces as best as possible, and we're definitely going to use antimicrobials whenever we're dealing with items like feces or blood or other things that come from people. Then we care a lot about the viruses that we shed, and we definitely want to use the right types of antimicrobials in those situations. What about specific instances with mold? Yeah, actually, there are a couple situations with mold that we do want to use antimicrobials. Very specifically for situations that are hard to keep dry. So, like a crawl space where you're like, oh, you know what, I'm going to clean this, but there's a damn good shot this place is going to get wet again. Yeah, using an antimicrobial that has a residual effect. So, some antimicrobials claim to have a residual effect for a while. Or maybe coating the surface with an antimicrobial paint or a glossy paint is a good idea if you think the surface won't stay dry. Or if you're dealing with specific molds and immunocompromised people, very specifically certain types of Aspergillus species, and a person who is immunocompromised who could potentially get an infection, yes, then we're going to probably want to use antimicrobials to try to kill as much as possible the mold that remains. So what's the big takeaway from our presentation? It is far more important to do a very good job cleaning a mold job or a water damage job in most instances than it is the application of antimicrobials. Many of the projects that you do, you don't even need antimicrobials, or the antimicrobials won't make any sort of a difference that is of worth. There are certain instances, though, sewage losses, immunocompromised people, certain types of water losses, where antimicrobials are actually very useful. If you like the presentation, awesome. Make sure you press like on the buttons below. Make a comment. I'll answer those comments with any questions that you have. Otherwise, you can call or email me with any additional questions. And be sure to check out our other presentations or go to our blog at microscopicminute.com to see other presentations.